Is a backstory that big of a deal? Is it not a big deal? Do you need it? Do you not need it? How much of it do you need? There's so much indecision and so many different philosophies on this. I want to try and shake this up in this video. And I'm calling in the help of 3 professionals here: Brennan Lee Mulligan, Abria Iyengar, and Matthew Mercer. They had a roundtable discussion a while ago, and this section on backstory really hit me because they hit a lot of different perspectives. They talk about having too much backstory of 40 pages. They talk about having absolutely nothing. Different tips all in the mix there to find that perfect backstory for that player, for every different kind of player. It's going to be a different journey and process for how much and where they got their backstory from. And there might be things going wrong with your campaign or your player's connection and engagement to the world because of backstory that you might not have realized. I'm going to send it over to them to get out their backstory thoughts, and then we're going to break it all down. Time out. Before we get into pulling in and engaging players into their own characters, you really want to try and pull and engage players into your world. And that's why the sponsor of this video is World Anvil. World Anvil is literally built to do this exact thing. It helps Dungeon Masters organize and navigate their world and helps give it to players to easily digest it, because sometimes it can be too much. Or maybe you don't have a lot, but either way, whatever you give your players, they're going to be excited and see, wow, my Dungeon Master is investing into this world. I can see this world. Even if it's just a simple map or different notes here and there, it shows players investment, and that's going to naturally just lead them to be more invested too. That's one of the aspects of World Anvil I don't think people talk about a lot, is showing that level of investment of something that they can actually see, much less all the benefits for Dungeon Masters of all the features they keep adding to do more stuff and do it easier. Trust me, go poke around on World Anvil for just a little bit. It's really intuitive, and what you could give your players in just a couple of minutes of putting stuff up on there, it's going to really be a next level. So big thanks to World Anvil for taking those worlds to the next level and for sponsoring this video. Back to the backstory.
And I feel like there's a weird analogy I always like of, like, you find out when you're baking, you'll find out what you didn't put into the mix in the oven. Like, you find out way too late what's not there.
Yeah.
And I feel that way all the time when people make characters and they'll get 3 or 4 sessions into something and be like, it's not clicking for me. There's something happened this session that wasn't fun, and you're like, it has nothing to do with this session. You made a character with no connection to the world that they're from. Or you made a character that has no history, and there's like complicated things about backstory. I don't think you need all the backstory in the world. What backstory is there to do is to give you a sense of trajectory. Where you are coming from informs where you are going, and it's the going that's essential. So people will be like, I don't need backstory, and you're like, cool, where's your momentum coming from? Like, how are you moving? Because if you start with someone who's like,
choices.
What's up? I have a class and spells and magical gear and literally no desires and no attachments. And you're like, buddy, that's enlightenment. I don't know what to tell you. You're actually done. You win.
You beat the game.
You beat the game. You have no attachments and no desires? You have no goals? No enemies or friends? Who are you? So yeah, that stuff I think is momentum, and there's precious little I feel I can do if a player doesn't have those things.
Huge. That's what we're talking about. Now, Matt's about to follow this up on the other side of that coin of having no backstory and building from that. And Brennan's talking about having a backstory and informing that. So we're going to kind of meet in the middle here between both of these DMs' perspectives on this. But on Brennan's point, the biggest thing I want you to take away from here is trajectory. Where you're going, where you came from, what things happen to you is going to filter the decisions that character makes. If you have certain goals, aspirations, ideals, beliefs, etc., you're going to interact with things that are presented to you differently. And if you don't have any of that, then it's just you, and it's you playing the game, which is fine. There's going to be parts of us in our own characters. There's going to be parts of us that are very different from ourselves, parts of our character that are the same as ourselves, whatever. But having that little bit of filter has that moment of, what would my character do? And if you have no history, no backstory, no anything, you have nothing to base that decision off of, and it's almost random. And if players are making random decisions because they don't have a character that has any sort of trajectory, there might not be as connected to them. So sometimes when players aren't connected to their characters, this could be a problem that's going on. They don't have any sort of insight to get into a character because they don't know what this character is, because they're just a class with a bunch of weapons and swords. But now Matt's going to go to the other side of that coin and has to give an example of someone with nothing and how you can still build into something.
And even then, like, depending on the style at the table, it can be fun to explore that in the moment. Like one of my best friends in high school, who was one of the first people I GM'd for, Ian, loved him to death. His character was a randomly wandering martial artist on a search for power. Whoa. And that was his whole backstory. And you know what? We had fun. We had fun finding out what that power was, finding out where he was wandering, finding out what happened to his parents, because everyone in D&D has dead parents.
Yeah.
Like, you know, and you just kind of find it as you go along. So yeah, you don't feel like, to your point, every player has to necessarily feel like they are going to write a 40-page backstory, and you don't really want that necessarily. 1 page is good for me.
Gaps.
2 pages more. at a certain point, it becomes a little challenging to incorporate all the details of the story if there's expectation to it. But if it's just for the personal player use, that's totally fine.
Yeah.
So there's the other side of that coin where you have this very broad, I'm going this way for power, what? But the cool part about this is gaps. If you have everything lined up and all of these things in this long 40+ page backstory, like they're saying, no. And if you have absolutely nothing to where you just have swords and power and you're a fighter, that's it. That's no. Also, cool part about having less is there are more gaps and you can fill in those gaps. Maybe you just have it somewhere that you lost someone and that's the only nugget you have. You haven't even decided who that person you lost is. You might be having a role play moment with your party around the campfire and they talk about how they lost their sister and you're like, you know what? That's what it is. And you can start to even beautifully discover your own backstory as you're playing. That is also cool. And the opposite of this other way, where you have the locked in backstory where you know you did this and had this loss and this and you found this and whatever else going on in the more involved backstory, or the no backstory. Both of those players' journeys are discovering and figuring out things. One person knows where they're coming from and they can make informed decisions and they have a trajectory, and the other person is trying to find their trajectory. Both of those players, though, are engaged. One of them is looking for answers based on their past experiences, and one of them is looking for answers to explain who they are. So in my opinion, the perfect mix is a balance of both. You have some sort of thing and goals and direction and have something of a backstory to have a place to go from, but leave gaps in there. I'm saying gaps. I like to leave mysterious gaps for Dungeon Master, like, oh, I got these powers, but I don't know how, or I found this thing, but I don't know what it is, or something happened to my mom and I don't know what it was. Those are cool gaps, and yes, I like to have my players sprinkle those in. Those are always fun as a Dungeon Master, but I'm also talking about gaps that don't feel like you have to answer every question. The town where you came from, what was it like? What job did you grow up doing before you became an adventurer? Maybe you don't have to answer that question, and you discover that, oh my gosh, it's pottery, and there's some sort of pottery NPC that speaks to you and that reminds you of something from your past, and now you can insert things into those gaps to really connect yourself to the world, which is also what they were talking about earlier. So if you do have some gaps from a lighter backstory, you can actually fill in those gaps with parts of the world that your Dungeon Master provides you, with parts from your other party members that you can actually tie yourselves into them, and fill in those gaps with similar things to your allies. Another quote from Brennan before we get to Abrius.
And I never found a way to articulate it, but I always knew the feeling of it. And it felt like the Iron Man, that last moment where something clicks.
Yeah.
That's how much backstory you need.
Yeah.
And that can be a sentence or it can be a book. But when you go, got it.
Yeah.
That is how much backstory you need, and that's going to be different for everybody. It's going to be coming from both angles from everybody, because I think too many times people think about backstory in a very linear way, and I'm trying to just shake that up here. Abria's going to finish it off stronger here for us with her little bonus tips, the things she does last minute for backstories.
Is right before the game starts, asking everyone at the table, like pulling them to the side and asking them really quick, like, what's your backstory? Because someone that wrote 40 pages is going to remember the thing they care about the most. And for those who didn't come up with enough, they will generate something in the moment as they talk, and I'm like, got it. I got the most important thing, and I read the 40 pages, but you actually only care about this one nugget right now, at least. So that's the one I'll remember and carry through in the beginning, and we can revisit the other 39 pages later.
I actually just took this advice and used it in my most recent campaign I just started a couple weeks ago. Just launched the Curse of Strahd campaign. The live play footage and all the gameplay releases is available to patrons as well. I also have a Dungeon Coach Plays channel where I break down the whole thing and how the whole things go from the behind the scenes perspective. But when I started this campaign off, we had about a month or so, 2 months worth of kind of prep, and I was getting some other stuff ready and lots of other stuff was going on before we started playing. We did some character creation, all that kind of stuff. We talked about a lot of stuff, but then right before, like the week before we started playing, I was like, hey guys, can you just give me a little bit of give me what your backstory is, give me a few bullet points, that's it. And I was super lackadaisical about it, super relaxed, and just kind of like, hey, give me some bullet points, right? Because I knew I took notes on all these stuff, but I wanted to know what was important to them. The players with more backstories whittled it down to the most important pieces, and the players with not a lot felt like they kind of had to give a little bit more, and then they kind of fleshed out their character a little bit more right before we started playing. And it also gave me a great snapshot into their psyche of what kind of thing they're about to enter into this game with. So Abria's tip right there is great for both of those types of players that we've just been talking about here. And I got to include this bonus tip from Brennan because I completely agree with this one too.
For me, I am lazy. So when someone hands me 40 pages of backstory, I go, oh, plot hooks you'll bite on every time? Thank you. And so in other words, there's an element of when I often poke my PCs for that stuff because I want to go hey, what's the stuff that is going to be like slam dunks for me.
And that right there brings us all the way back full circle to the beginning of this whole thing, where you have a character that has a trajectory of they have things boiling up underneath them to send them off. They have things possibly that they don't know they need to discover. And this is the little carrot on the stick of what are those things that they're chasing after? What things do they want to know? What they want to search for power? What things can you put out in front of them that they're going to bite on every time? And if a character knows where they're coming from, has inspiration to find out more about where they're going, there's the trajectory connection. And there's things along the way to entice them along. How can they not love it? And to bring back in Abria's point, you can keep asking them and keep checking in on these little backstory nuggets to kind of see and do little check-ins across the campaign. But I challenge you to poke your players and try and have that conversation and get this picture going. Don't lowball it, because you're going to run into problems that could have been prevented if you put in a little work beforehand with backstory. I got a lot of different things about backstory on this channel. I've done probably 4 or 5 videos at this point. I'll put a link down in the description to more backstory stuff, because I fully believe in it. I have an entire PDF I'll also put down in the description of backstory. It's a template that helps your players, guide them through some sort of thought-provoking questions to kind of discover these things, to get them asking these questions so they at least have something to give you. I hope that resource helps. I hope all these videos help. You keep staying creative and thinking outside that backstory box. Peace.